Hey, welcome back. Today, let's talk about SynthWave drums, Part 1. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to talk a little bit about specifically drums in synthwave type music. There's a very specific aesthetic that comes along with this style of music. There is variation, obviously, in the way people make drums sound in this style of music. One of my main references would be the musician Home. That's just all one word in caps. If you look him up, you might find that you like his aesthetic and style. There's some variation in his music as well. But some essential qualities of synthwave would be a nostalgic quality. So you would want to have some drifting kind of sounds, some pitch modulation probably in various elements of the sound. You'd want to have some of it seem a bit lo-fi. So lo-fi is a component of synthwave. And if you get, all of your elements together, mostly synthesizers, usually not a lot of other instruments, and the drums often have a really central role in this type of music, so you do want them quite loud and in your face. And if you get all these elements together, you probably have yourself a pretty interesting track. Let's start by looking just briefly at this final version of this track. So it's come off my camera, which is why this track just has a camera name on it. And this was performed in the space for the Synonym Buns music video. It was performed in the lab that was set up for that video. And so a certain number of things were recorded at the same time. Modular synth, which also I was using the KeyStep Pro as well as the modular synth to control a mini Moog that I've had for a number of years. And there were also some synth voices coming off the modular, including a drum voice. So let me just show you, this is all baked into the track. And one thing that you see some slices in my track, and that would have just been, I believe, a time alignment to the grid. It's mostly aligning. Not entirely sure why I sliced it up, but that's my most likely guess. So this is what came off the instrument, and it's all blended together. So I have no capability of separating anything from the performance. So there's a bit of drums in this already, and they're coming from the Bacillimus Iteratus alter from Noise Engineering. And if we go a little farther into the track, you can hear a bit more of the drum. So that's underneath the whole thing. I usually have at least two main drum parts that are interacting on either different time signatures or different loops lengths. So what I find is nice about that for me is that the loops feel less loopy when there are two loops interacting of different lengths. So in this case, one of the loops is coming off of the modular in the actual performance itself. And the second drum part was the next part I added to the track. So let's take a look at that. Now, it's all done in Maschine down here. And I do have two layers of Maschine, but the second layer is just some cymbals and extra percussion that sort of rise up out of the track. So let's start by just listening to the main Maschine layer with no changes to it. So right now it's very filtered, and you can see that I'm doing filtering here. So I have this post filter is going to be the high pass. So the high pass kind of the low pass. So the low pass has kind of come down and scooped out some of the sound. And the high pass is low frequencies being removed. So this lower line is low frequencies being removed. And the upper line here is high frequencies being removed. And these are done on this MiniVerb plugin. This actually is an echo, and it can add vibrato and bit crushing. It's from AudioThing, but I really like the filters on it for whatever reason. They just have a particular sound, and there's two of them, so I can control them independently. The post filter I'm usually using as the low pass, and the pre-filter I'm usually using as the high pass. So that's varying the sound quite significantly right there, but it's more of a polish on the top of the drum track. So this is the main track, and let me just add these cymbals back in that I mentioned, which were in a separate session of Maschine. Oh yeah, see? These aren't necessarily on different loop lengths, but it just adds some ambient. So let's dive right in on my main Maschine track here. No other effects. I will add a bunch of effects to the main loop or the main track, but then I'll usually move them onto a bus. Like if I'm going to have multiple layers, I'll usually have the effects moved over to the bus, so they're all turned off here. So we won't worry about that for now. We're just going to look at this main Maschine track. So I have a length of 4 bars. For a change for me, because I often use odd time signatures, this piece is basically just in 4/4. And I have a TR-707 copy kit. I downloaded it just straight off of freeware, off of the internet. And at some past point, I separated out all the samples were separate, but I assigned them from Maschine. So it didn't have a 707, but that's a particular drum kit that I really enjoy. Okay, so now let's line up the loop and go back into Maschine and have a listen to what we have. You can see I'm only really using kick, snare, and hat, and I'm not using multiple kits here in Maschine, so I've only got one kit and 3 elements going in this whole loop, so that keeps it a little simpler to talk about. And I don't know why the loop had 8 bars at some past point, but I've just limited it to 4 at this point. And one of the reasons to do at least 4 bars is just to add enough variation that it feels a bit more human. 1 or 2 bars, for the right part, it can work really, really well. But for something a bit more mechanical like this, it helps to have more bars to work from. So let's just listen to it and talk about it. So first thing you can notice is there's a lot of straight kicks, but also some syncopated kicks. And one thing I've talked about quite a bit in the past is anything on the off beats, like the non-critical beats of the bar, often have a lower velocity. We're seeing the velocity, and these are the main things I'm playing with in this beat. I do not have anything shifted off the grid, I don't believe, in terms of the location of the beats. Although what I do have is about 5% swing. And I tend to always use some swing, maybe a low level of swing, but certainly some. Now, on the kick, one thing worth noting is on most actual elements, I'm using an ADSR-like effect. And on the kick of a TR-707 like this, that's pretty important because I don't like the really beach ball-y kind of hit of the initial beat, and I will show you what that means. See, I've got an attack here that's more than 0, right? So it's cutting off the very beginning of the sound. So let's bring the attack to full. Now, it's filtered a bit, so you can't really hear that beach ball-y thing quite as much. But it's pretty thwacky, and I had it about here. That just allows a little more of the body of the sound to come through. And now also on the ADSR, let's look at the fact that I usually find a tight decay like this. So if we turn down the sustain, we'll hear how tight the decay is. Right? So there's not a lot of weight or body to the sound of that phase. And then if we let all of the decay come through and all of the release, it's really taking over the track. not actually sure what level this was at before I started. That feels pretty good though. And often I have the full release, just let the release out, but bring the sustain down so that the release portion is quieter and doesn't get woofy or boomy or anything like that. You'll see a very similar thing on my snare here. So I'm definitely using ADSR again, and I'm definitely tightening up the decay of the sound, or sorry, the release of the sound. So these snares are pretty much only occurring on the beat, but there's a little syncopated one that lines up with the actual synth part as well. So it kind of feels interesting. So that's the snare without any decay at all, like that, sorry, without any release at all or any sustain. So that's the piece I want to hit you, right? That piece is louder. And this snare is tuned down one semitone. And I usually just tune it to be sort of in tune with the piece of music. Let's bring that sustain to full. Very heavy snare now, right? Very thick and taking up a lot of the track. Somewhere around there. I'm not entirely sure. Usually in and around 70%. And look, like I'm doing a very similar thing on the hi-hats. So I have hats and they're very constant, but you can also see that the velocity of these hi-hats varies, and it's on the off beat of each bar and each piece of the rhythm that's the loudest. Like I'm halfway in between the quarter notes, like the that beat is louder in the pattern, and the quietest is the downbeat, because the initial beat of each quarter note, it's like kind of almost like ducking, like it's ducking using velocity to an extent that we're hearing here, right? So let's just show you again on the sustain. So let's take it down to 0. That's the piece of the hi-hat I really want you to hear. This is what it sounds like if it's got too much sustain and release on it. But I'm actually releasing it here. See, I'm sucking in the release, because if we went... it doesn't really make much difference, actually. Oh, because I've got full sustain. What am I talking about? Okay, so let's try where it was, which is like 55. So tight. I've lowered the pitch of the hi-hat as well, a reasonable amount. So that's that component of the beat, which is the main component of the beat. And you'll be able to hear how it's sort of fitting with the main synth part here when the snare goes off the beat. There, see? Bump, bump. Pretty straight. So I'm going with a pretty straight beat because the synth part is pretty syncopated, so I don't really want to make it too fancy, if that makes any sense. Sorry about the glitching in my interface here, but you get the idea. I hope there were some sweet and useful nuggets in there for you. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell on the channel so you can see more videos like this. This is part of a longer series, so I'm sure there's more that I have to share that you might find really useful. Keep on keeping on, and I'll see you again soon.